The three of us, and Warren, introducing, and Muhammad Ali, helped me look at that. That's crazy for me. You know, I mean you're not expecting someone to say something like that to you because his eyes were lit up and I mean I don't know what he expected me to do. You know, Jack Nicholson admitted at 88 before finally naming the 4 stars he could never stand sharing the screen with. The famous actor known for his wicked grin and no-filter attitude described one as a fake, another as all ego, no talent, and said, one made every day on set a living hell. After decades of staying quiet, Jack's blacklist is out and it's more brutal than anyone expected. Ray Winstone. British actor Ray Winstone is well known for his tough, straight-talking personality, both on and off the screen. In an honest 2014 interview, he didn't hold back when talking about his experience working alongside famous actor Jack Nicholson on Martin Scorsese's Oscar-winning crime thriller, The Departed, 2006, though the film was a huge hit with critics and audiences, with Nicholson praised for his wild, scary performance as gangster Frank Costello. Winstone remembered working together in much less nice terms. We just didn't get on, Winstone said simply. His tone in the interview was not just mild annoyance, but real disappointment and frustration. According to Winstone, Nicholson's behavior when cameras weren't rolling was very different from the professional respect usually given to an actor of his fame. Winstone didn't hold back when describing his former co-star. I thought he was so far up his own, but it was unbelievable. The blunt comment showed how disappointed he really was, while Winstone had definitely started the project with some respect for Nicholson's decades-long career, marked by famous performances in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Chinatown, and The Shining. That respect quickly disappeared. Winstone painted a picture of Nicholson as a man completely wrapped up in his own ego, one who seemed to enjoy the power games on set, especially when they worked in his favor. According to Winstone, Nicholson wasn't just distant or self-centered. He was actively disrespectful, both in private moments and in front of others. He was very rude, Winstone said, noting that the famous actor's arrogance wasn't just limited to talks with fellow cast members. Nicholson's dismissive and rude behavior extended to the crew, the extras, and even Winstone's own family. In one incident, Winstone described with barely hidden disgust, Nicholson's behavior toward Winstone's wife crossed a personal line. He wasn't even polite to my wife, Winstone revealed. That told me everything I needed to know about him. For a man like Winstone, raised in London's East End and famous for playing tough, honest characters who value loyalty and respect, that was the ultimate insult. His voice got tight with anger as he remembered the incident. And he didn't hide the fact that Nicholson's behavior stirred something angry in him. If he had been a younger man, Winstone said, I'd have definitely knocked him out. It wasn't said as a brag, but as a real admission of just how close their friction came to boiling over. Winstone's story offers a rare and unfiltered look behind the scenes of a Hollywood blockbuster. The Departed, directed by Martin Scorsese, and starring a powerhouse group that included Leonardo DiCaprio, Matt Damon, and Mark Wahlberg, was widely praised as a triumph of modern crime cinema. But Winstone's experience on set, specifically his encounters with Nicholson, told a different story. While others may have kept their opinions quiet, out of respect for Nicholson's fame, or for fear of professional backlash, Winstone didn't care about being careful. He's not a god, Winstone said. He's just an actor, a man like anyone else. And if a man can't treat people around him decently, especially women, then I don't care how many awards he's won or how many box office records he's broken. Winstone's words carried the weight of real experience. He'd worked with some of the best in the business and, by his own admission, had learned to deal with egos. But Nicholson's attitude hit a nerve deeper than just arrogance. It felt to Winstone like a form of entitlement bordering on cruelty. There were reportedly moments during filming when the tension between the two actors threatened to ruin scenes entirely. While Scorsese was able to keep order on set, it became clear to many involved in the production that Winstone and Nicholson were simply oil and water professionals bound by a shared project, but completely mismatched in personality and values. Winstone, who played Mr. French, Costello's loyal and cold-blooded enforcer, found it ironic that while he was playing a character who showed unwavering devotion to Nicholson's character on screen, the reality between takes was anything but peaceful. Still, Winstone completed the job with professionalism, channeling his dislike into a performance that remains one of his most quietly chilling. The cold stare of Mr. French may have drawn partially from the very real contempt simmering beneath the surface. In hindsight, Winstone admitted that working with Nicholson had taught him an unexpected lesson, not about acting, but about the importance of humility. It showed me how not to treat people, he said. I don't care how famous you are. That stuff don't fly where I'm from. To date, neither Nicholson nor anyone close to him has responded publicly to Winstone's comments. And given Nicholson's increasing withdrawal in recent years, a reply seems unlikely. Still, Winstone's story remains one of the more unfiltered glimpses into the cracks of Hollywood myth. It reminds audiences that behind the glamour and acclaim are real people, flawed, fallible, and sometimes deeply unpleasant. John Belushi, in the late 1970s, Going South 1978, presented a unique opportunity for two of Hollywood's most electric and unpredictable personalities, Jack Nicholson and John Belushi, to share the screen. On paper, it had the makings of a memorable collaboration. Nicholson, the already acclaimed actor stepping into the director's chair for only the second time, and Belushi, the rising comedic superstar from Saturday Night Live, taking on one of his earliest film roles. But what began as a promising partnership rapidly turned into a behind-the-scenes disaster marked by ego clashes, personal frustrations, and ultimately a deep-seated hatred that neither man would ever fully shake. The Western comedy set in the post-Civil War era starred Nicholson as Henry Moon, a small-time outlaw spared from the noose by a frontier woman, Mary Steenburgen, in her screen debut, who agrees to marry him to save his life. Belushi was cast in a minor role as Deputy Hector, and while the part itself was never central to the film's plot, his presence on set quickly became a point of friction. The root of the conflict lay in a combustible mix of Belushi's antics and Nicholson's increasing frustration in his dual role as star and director. By 1978, John Belushi was already notorious for his wild behavior. Fresh off the breakout success of Animal House and his reign on SNL, he was Hollywood's new bad boy, hilarious, magnetic, and deeply unpredictable. But with that rising fame came a deepening dependence on drugs, especially cocaine. On the set of Going South, Belushi's erratic behavior, fueled by constant partying and frequent drug use, became a disruptive force. Production insiders would later recall the atmosphere as tense and chaotic, with Belushi often arriving late, unable to focus, or simply disappearing between scenes. Jack Nicholson, by contrast, was known for being particular and in full control when behind the camera, although Nicholson himself had a reputation for embracing the counterculture lifestyle of the era, including his own well-documented indulgences. He drew a sharp line when it came to work. As the director of Going South, he took his responsibilities seriously and expected a certain level of discipline from his cast, no matter how famous or beloved they were. Belushi, in Nicholson's eyes, was crossing that line repeatedly. The tipping point came during the first few weeks of production. According to reports from the crew, Nicholson tried repeatedly to control Belushi's behavior, only to be met with sarcasm or open defiance. While the specifics of their exchanges remain largely undocumented, the tension was obvious to everyone. On set, Nicholson, facing mounting pressures to keep the project on track, began cutting Belushi's scenes and limiting his presence in the film altogether. What was initially envisioned as a small but vibrant supporting role was slashed to near insignificance. This professional rebuke hit Belushi hard. He had viewed Going South as an opportunity to work with a legend, perhaps even as a bridge into more serious film work. Instead, he found himself marginalized, scolded, and dismissed by someone he had once admired. His resentment simmered throughout the shoot, but it exploded into public view later after filming had wrapped. Jack treated me like dirt on Going South, Belushi is alleged to have said. I hate him. The bitterness in those words reflected more than just artistic differences. For Belushi, Nicholson's behavior felt personal. A betrayal from a fellow rebel, someone he assumed would understand his creative chaos rather than reject it. But Nicholson, older and more entrenched in the machinery of Hollywood, had little patience for Belushi's freewheeling attitude when it interfered with production. Nicholson never responded publicly to Belushi's accusations. As was typical of him, he avoided addressing conflicts in the press and let his work speak for itself. But those close to the production suggested that Nicholson had been deeply frustrated, not just by Belushi's lack of professionalism, but by the pressure it placed on him as a director, trying to steer a complex shoot with a large ensemble cast. There was a sense that Nicholson felt betrayed, too, perhaps not on a personal level, but on a professional one. He had brought Belushi into his film, and instead of getting a creative partner, he got what felt like a liability. For Belushi, the fallout from Going South was just one chapter in an increasingly volatile career. While he would go on to find massive success in the Blues Brothers and remain a comedy icon, stories of his on-set difficulties only multiplied in the years that followed. Going South marked the beginning of a more complicated relationship with the film industry, one that balanced creative genius with chronic self-destruction. And at the center of that turning point stood Jack Nicholson, the man Belushi blamed for humiliating him when he was trying to prove himself as more than just a TV comic. Cher dazzled audiences with her darkly enchanting performance. In The Witches of Eastwick, 1987, she faced an emotional and unexpected hurdle that nearly derailed her involvement in the film altogether. Long before cameras rolled, before she shared the screen with Jack Nicholson, Susan Sarandon, and Michelle Pfeiffer, Cher was already being judged, not for her talent, but for something far more cutting, her age and desirability. What unfolded behind the scenes offers a revealing glimpse into the brutal honesty of Hollywood, the precarious self-esteem of even its biggest stars, and Jack Nicholson's peculiar way of both bruising and mending egos. At the time, Cher was already an Oscar nominee, an acclaimed singer-turned-actress, steadily climbing toward the peak of her film career. But in a moment of stark vulnerability, she was reduced to tears when director George Miller candidly relayed feedback from an initial meeting between himself and Jack Nicholson. According to Cher, Miller came back from that meeting with blunt words she would not soon forget. Both he and Nicholson had felt she was too old and not sexy for the role of Alexandra Medford, one of three bewitching women seduced by devilish Daryl Van Horn. For Cher, the comment was more than professional criticism. It was personal. She was in her early 40s, a time when actresses in Hollywood often found themselves discarded or relegated to supporting roles. To hear that her age and appearance were in question, especially in an industry so notoriously obsessed with youth, struck her to the core. "I was really hurt," Cher later admitted. "I cried, I really did. I didn't think I was that fragile, but I was." The moment threatened to undo everything. It wasn't just the sting of rejection, it was the source. Jack Nicholson, one of the most respected and powerful actors in the business, had seemingly dismissed her with a casual cruelty that felt devastating. And yet, what followed that moment of pain was something Cher never expected: compassion from the very man whose words had wounded her. Later that same evening, in what could have been an uncomfortable or awkward encounter, Nicholson surprised her by extending an invitation. He asked her to join him, and possibly others, for dinner or drinks. Cher, still emotionally raw, accepted. She didn't know what to expect, but what unfolded turned the emotional tide. "He sat with us all night," Cher recalled. "He talked to me, listened, laughed. He made me feel seen again. Not like a woman over 40 trying to prove something, but just me." Nicholson didn't offer an apology outright. That wasn't his style, but through his presence, through a genuine display of interest and warmth, he helped rebuild the very confidence he had helped dismantle. It was a paradox that characterized much of Nicholson's off-screen persona, capable of devastating bluntness, but equally capable of profound, almost disarming charm. For Cher, that night served as a turning point. It reminded her of her own worth, not just as an actress, but as a woman still fully in command of her power. And perhaps it was that inner fire, rekindled by an unlikely source, that made her performance in The Witches of Eastwick so memorable. On screen, she played Alexandra as a sultry, strong-willed, and intelligent woman, unafraid to go toe-to-toe with Nicholson's Daryl. The chemistry between them is palpable, not in spite of their real-life tension, but perhaps because of it. The film itself was a critical and box-office success, earning praise for its balance of dark humor, magical realism, and social commentary. But beneath the surface of that success was the story of how one of the film's stars nearly didn't make it to the starting line, and how a moment of unexpected humanity helped bridge a painful gap. What this story reveals about Jack Nicholson is as complicated as the man himself. He was, by many accounts, someone who could say incredibly hurtful things without much filter. But he was also capable of turning around and offering comfort, often without even directly addressing the offense. His bluntness wasn't always laced with malice. Sometimes it stemmed from an almost clinical honesty, a refusal to play the game of Hollywood flattery. But the fact that he stayed with Cher that night, talked, laughed, and reminded her of her value, says something about his understanding of people. He could be cutting, but he wasn't heartless. Cher would later speak of Nicholson with a curious mix of admiration and weariness. She respected his talent, his instincts, and even his unpredictability. But she never forgot that moment, that brief but intense reckoning with how fragile a performer's confidence could be and how powerful it was to have someone, even inadvertently, help restore it. In many ways, that dinner or late-night hangout, unpublicized, unfilmed, unrecorded, was more telling than anything captured on screen. It showed how, in an industry that often tears people down with a smile, the rare act of unguarded sincerity can leave a lasting mark. Jack Nicholson didn't need to tell Cher she was sexy. By staying with her, by engaging with her as an equal, he showed it. And for someone who had just been told she was too old and not sexy, that gesture mattered more than any apology. Geena Davis. Early in her acting career, long before she was an Oscar-winning star, Geena Davis found herself navigating the treacherous waters of Hollywood stardom, where charm, power, and boundary-blurring advances often collided. Among her earliest brushes with the industry's seductive was an infamous encounter with one of its most legendary and unapologetically forward figures, Jack Nicholson. It's a story that's often told with a smile, not malice, and remembered more for its humor and its sly reversal of power than for any lingering animosity. But beneath the punchline lies a telling snapshot of what it meant to be a young actress, in a town where saying no required both grace and grit. The incident occurred in the early 1980s, when Davis was still relatively unknown. She had landed her first small roles in Tootsie and various TV spots and was beginning to emerge as a striking presence in the Hollywood scene. Tall, statuesque, intelligent, and grounded in a way that stood apart from the typical starlets of the time. Davis's combination of beauty and brains didn't go unnoticed, especially by powerful men in the industry. One of them was Jack Nicholson. At the time, Nicholson was already at the peak of his fame, with iconic roles in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Chinatown, and The Shining under his belt. He was both critically revered and culturally mythologized, not just for his talent, but for his infamous charisma and well-documented reputation. As a ladies' man, known for his grinning magnetism and roguish charm, he often blurred the line between flirtation and pursuit. As Geena Davis recalled years later in an interview with The New Yorker, their interaction began during a social event, a party, or industry function where they crossed paths. Davis, still relatively new to such circles, found herself the recipient of Nicholson's attention. He expressed his interest not once, but repeatedly, eventually resorting to a handwritten note that read simply, but suggestively, "When is it going to happen?" It was the kind of message that many actresses might have felt pressured to accept, or awkwardly deflect. But Davis, as she would later explain, had come prepared. She had recently received a piece of career-saving advice from none other than Dustin Hoffman, her Tootsie cook. Hoffman, concerned about Davis navigating the same predatory culture he had witnessed for years, told her something she never forgot. Most men in Hollywood are only interested in one thing. Don't let them think they're going to get it. Taking that advice to heart, Davis crafted a response to Nicholson that was both clever and self-assured, a blend of honesty, humor, and finesse that not only preserved her dignity, but gently turned the tables. She wrote back, "You're very attractive, but I'd hate to ruin the sexual tension." Nicholson's reaction: he laughed loudly and genuinely. According to Davis, rather than taking offense or doubling down, he appreciated the wit of the response and backed off. The flirtation ended there, not with a fight, nor with resentment, but with a moment of mutual recognition. She had held her ground, and he, to his credit, respected it. The story has since been retold many times, often framed as a lighthearted anecdote about young actresses learning to handle themselves in the lion's den of Hollywood, but it also functions as a nuanced portrait of both personalities involved. For Jack Nicholson, it reinforced the image of the charismatic provocateur who never shied away from making his desires known, but also someone capable of accepting rejection with humor rather than hostility. For Geena Davis, it became emblematic of the kind of boundary setting that would define not just her career, but her advocacy later in life. Indeed, this early experience would later echo through Davis's work with the Geena Davis Institute on Gender in Media, an organization she founded to combat sexism in Hollywood and promote better representation of women in film and television. Encounter with Nicholson became, in retrospect, an example of how assertiveness and cleverness could navigate an environment where power dynamics were often skewed against women. It's worth noting that Davis never spoke of the moment with bitterness. Her tone, when recounting the story, has always been calm, even amused, as if she understood that the exchange was part of the larger performance of Hollywood courtship, where personalities like Nicholson often leaned into their reputations. Testing limits more out of habit than hostility. Still, that didn't mean such moments should go unchallenged. Davis's polite but firm response sent a message that she wasn't someone to be objectified or intimidated, even by someone as powerful as Jack Nicholson. Nicholson, for his part, seemed to admire the comeback. His laughter wasn't sarcastic or scornful. It was the reaction of a man who had met his match, however, briefly, and that's perhaps what makes the story endure. There's no villain here, no scandal, just a moment of high-wire social maneuvering that reveals as much about charm as it does about character. What do you think about the 4 actors that Jack Nicholson hates the most? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.